you are 8 times more likely to get into Harvard undergraduate school than you are to be selected to open a Chick-fil-A restaurant. Franchising, especially at the elite levels, at the top brands, is the new Ivy League. I think that the church bell should ring with sadness. I think we should mark the death of a family when that happens. And I think we should mark the death of a family when the entrepreneurial venture that was family owned for 100 years now gets sold to some private equity vulture merely to placate the liquidity desire for the children.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. Our goal is to create an army of Catholic business owners who are dedicated to carrying out God's will in the world. All right, before we start, please note, if you are in or near New York City, we are hosting a dinner for Catholic founders on the 16th of December. Still pulling together all the details, but that's the date I'm committing to. So register to attend with the link in the description and reach out if you would like to sponsor the event or help organize it in any way. We are looking to find a good spot to host because we should be able to get probably around 20 people. I've got a pretty good network in New York and plus some of my other friends there. So we should be able to get a pretty large group if we have the space. If we don't have the space, we'll end up capping it smaller. So if you'd like to help organize or know of a place, please reach out to me directly to help out. All right, today I am speaking with Mike Parrott. So Mike is a pretty big personality, I would say. After spending some time in the Marines, he ended up building a career in finance, and from there he ended up getting involved in the movie industry and has worked closely with Mel Gibson, David Henry, Jim Caviezel, Bug Hall, on movies like Sound of Freedom, Monster Summer, and Cabrini, some popular titles that you probably heard recently. He also started 3 home services business, which he eventually ended up selling actually quite recently. And one of these was a franchise. I mentioned that for context later. And then he's also in the process of buying another business. And he's also teaching at Benedictine College just outside of Kansas City right now, while doing a lot of research on the connection between franchises and the medieval guilds. In general, Mike is a very fascinating person, so there was a lot that we could have talked about. The core things we ended up focusing on for this conversation were the first being the trades and the connection between working with your hands and finding fulfillment in your work. Then we talked a lot about family legacy, family continuity, and the process of so-called discovering your identity versus just accepting the identity that you were born into, that you were given by God, effectively. And then he also shares some of his research on how franchises are likely a very close successor to the medieval guild model. So in general, just really, really fascinating conversation. I walked away just feeling so inspired with so many ideas and things to think about. I think personally, the most intriguing ideas to me were this idea of family legacy. And he talked about that mostly at the end of the episode. So I would stick around for that. It's really, really interesting stuff here. Occasionally, I have an episode where I just feel like I could go on all day talking to them because I just want to absorb so much from them. And that's how I felt with this conversation with Mike. So before we do start, shout out to our sponsors, Verso Jobs. If you need to hire mission-aligned talent, reach out to them. St. Kobe Studios, if you need to produce a podcast and want it done properly. And then Paraclete VA, if you are looking to hire offshore talent, but you want to make sure they're Catholic, somebody that you can trust, reach out today as well. All of those links can be found in the description. And one last thing, if you resonate with the content that we put out each week, consider becoming a paid supporter of this Substack. By doing so, you'll get access to the Catholic Founders Guild if you'd like, and all the perks that come with that. All right, enjoy the show. All right, Mike, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. You were just making me jealous of your weather down in Kansas City.
Oh, it's amazing here. Yeah, I don't know. We're blessed.
It's very nice, yeah. I'll be going to Kansas City pretty soon, so I'll get to experience it. It will be the middle of winter, though, so I'm sure it's not going to be as pleasant. But anyway, so, you have had a pretty interesting and winding career. So without going and explaining the entire thing to us, would you mind just giving people a little bit of a summary of the core chapters of your career and what you've been up to?
Yeah, sure. So after college, joined the Marine Corps, was an officer, lived overseas, went to 2 wars, got out of the Marine Corps, went to Wall Street, worked in New York City, and Chicago and LA and Austin, Texas at various firms for like 6 years, did mergers and acquisitions and capital markets transactions, took a company public and issued some public debt for a company. After that, I got into film because I was in LA and I met a bunch of film guys and we formed a company together called Novo Media Group with David Henry and Bug Hall. I also worked with the Metanoia film team, the folks who did Sound of Freedom. And sometimes the two groups would collaborate with each other and sometimes I would work with one or with another one. kind of bouncing back and forth, being the finance guy for those. And after that, I got more serious into entrepreneurship and started 3 different businesses and vertically integrated them into one unit, and sold that unit earlier this year. And I've been teaching. I've been teaching at a local Catholic college as well for the last several years, and really enjoying that. So, working on a doctorate right now in finance and entrepreneurship, and learning data science, which I think is kind of the future and sort of necessary that we all know something about. And 8 kids, and happily married, and love what I do.
Yeah. So with all of these, I guess, different changes in your career, do you, when you look back retroactively, do you think that there was a particular mechanism or thought process that usually guided you in making those transitions? Like, how do you make those decisions to change things?
You know, my wife and I spend a lot of time sort of agonizing and redeciding, like, what would happen if, because there's all these decision points that everybody hits in their lives. Like, what if I had stayed at this one place and not gone to this other place? And we do a lot of what if like conversations. All I can say is that I think that men especially kind of have to make the best decision that they can make with the information that they have at the time. And, just pray that they're pray for, I guess, actual wisdom, supernatural wisdom, not just the natural virtue. And then just don't look back. I don't like to spend a lot of time reevaluating.
Mm.
What if I stayed in the Marine Corps? What if I stayed on Wall Street? What if I never did movies? What if I never did the home services business? Because each transition is painful. It requires a learning curve. There are pluses and minuses. I'm a little bit sanguine though, so new stuff is exciting.
Hmm.
So there's always that.
Do you think that there's anything core to your upbringing that kind of led you to, I guess, I don't know if it's core values or things that you cared about that ended up driving you towards some of that newness, or just like where you are now, like how it led you here? I'm always curious to understand people's like intrinsic motivation on that front.
Well, I think this is well known by social scientists that like being married and having children and having a house and a mortgage payment and all that stuff causes men to make decisions in service of their families.
Hmm.
I think one of the crises in our culture today is that like home ownership is unaffordable for the Zoomer generation. Median first-time home buyers are like 39 years old. Therefore, a lot of younger guys are putting off getting married, having children, and so their decisions are primarily about themselves. They're not making decisions that are fundamentally about other people, taking care of children, taking care of their wives, and that sort of thing. And so those are 2 different mindsets when it comes to like choosing the next thing that you're going to do, or deciding to reinvest in the current thing that you're doing. So since I got married young and we started having children very young, I mean, we got married the same day I graduated from Texas A&M. And, immediately we were expecting new life and headed overseas to live in Japan. And so like there was no time in life for me to just say, well, I want to figure out what I want to do. It's never really
Hmm.
about what I wanted to do. It was about what made the most sense for our family at the time.
Hmm. And do you find that sort of a kind of a freeing framework that you put it in God's hands and you are not as selfishly focused, and that was like leading you, or what?
Yeah, I didn't always view it as freedom. I think it's really easy to view it kind of as like, oh, I'm shackled, like I can only make this decision because this is the only thing that makes sense, because and some guys have like children with special needs, and some guys have like don't have the kind of wife that I have, who like is very strong and very independent and doesn't need me to like coddle her and that sort of thing. Like some guys can't get away with working the hours that I've worked or traveling as much as I've traveled. And so it's easy, I think, to view it actually as the inverse of how you described, as kind of like boundary conditions for what is possible. But I think I really did learn, especially when I owned my own businesses, that actually just relying on God's providence is very easy. It's uncomfortable, but it's a lot easier doing it that way than trying to figure everything out yourself. So I would say that I very much have felt both sides of that coin.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you tell me a little bit more about the businesses that you ran? If I understand correctly, you've exited those now, but you're in the process of doing something else. But can you tell me a little bit more about those businesses and how you got into that?
Yeah, sure. So I separated from the filmmaking business for personal professional reasons. It wasn't right at the time. There were also external forces happening at the time that just kind of like made it very clear that it wasn't time to in life to make movies anymore. As fun as that is, and it's a lot less fun than it sounds. It sounds really fun, but it's kind of a grind. And so after after working on Cabrini, shortly after Cabrini, and I was working on this movie called Monster Summer with Mel Gibson, a few personal things happened, and I realized I need to do something else. I was also kind of hyper radicalized by COVID, which I think is a big scam. And so I wanted to do something that's completely local, that I'm in control of, that could never be canceled or told that you're like not important or non-essential by, any like bureaucrat or whatever. So I got actually into home services in the industry broadly. So I founded a painting company that initially started doing residential, but we very quickly transitioned into commercial painting. And we're painting huge new build warehouses and distribution centers and data centers and that sort of thing. And then an on-call handyman and remodel business. And then I also got into like designed storage, like think California Closets, but under a different brand. And I kind of layered all those things on top of each other and provided coverage, kind of all throughout the city that I live near, and or actually a couple of the cities that I live near. And we grew, man. I mean, we had a really good run there. Starting from zero is a grind. I don't think I'll ever want to start from zero again. I'm potentially buying a business here next month, which I can tell you the dynamics of that as well. But I don't really want to ever start from zero again. It's really difficult. But I did it 3 times, 2 times successfully, 1 time unsuccessfully. And then, I wrapped it all up into one nice package, got it to a couple $1,000,000 in revenue. I had some really good systems in place, some signed contracts, and God sent a buyer into my life. I wasn't even looking to sell. And a Catholic guy, young guy, and he wants to be an entrepreneur, and he's a lot smarter than me because he doesn't want to build from zero. And he just kind of was like, I want to buy your business. And it kind of worked out providentially. Again, this is one of those decision points where it's like, I didn't put it up for sale, didn't hire a broker, didn't go out to market, wasn't looking to sell, but it happened, and it turned out to be the exact right thing that I needed to do at that point in time. And so in July of this year, the burden of ownership like passed from me to him, and I still help him quite a bit. And I'm still involved, and I'm looking at booking $1,000,000 painting job for him next year. And I love that. I love that now and it's continuing to thrive, and under new ownership, it's forward, always forward. So I love that.
Are you looking to hire people who actually care about your mission? You should get in touch with Verso Jobs. Verso Jobs is a platform that uses a gamified application process to find candidates who actually have the right skills and mission alignment with your team. Joe and the team at Verso Jobs first understand your needs, then they go out and they headhunt the best candidates and present you with highly aligned profiles in very short order, oftentimes turning around profiles within a few days or a week. They also won't break the bank. So whether you're hiring for your startup, school, parish, or nonprofit, Verso makes it easy to find mission-aligned talent ready to build the kingdom. Visit versojobs.com to get started. That's Verso, VERSO jobs.com. To the heights. There's a couple things I'd like to pull on there. So first of all, I'd like to ask just your thesis around this kind of blue collar work of training your guys and investing in them. Do you have any kind of particular things that you use as guide points and as you built that business and investing in the team?
There's a backlash against college, and Charlie Kirk, rest in peace, was at the forefront of that. And there's a lot of people who are like, don't go to college. It's a little bit interesting for me because I teach college, and I interact with 18 to 22-year-olds several days a week, and I spend a lot of time with them, and I think I understand them fairly well. And that's also the demographic that I tend to hire, not only in the film business, but in the trades businesses as well. And look, I think I just take a more traditional point of view with respect to college, which is that the idea that everyone should go is, I think, overstated. It's not necessarily the pathway to the American dream. And by the way, we have a huge deficit of tradesmen in the United States, especially like in this we're living through the fourth industrial revolution and the transition into AI. And like one of the things that is needed for AI to fully come online, which we can't stop this as much as I maybe would like to, I can't stop it, but we need electrical contractors.
Hmm.
and we need concrete people. And like we have to build the data centers, we have to bring the power to the servers. We need data scientists as well. So some of those people are highly skilled. Like data science is the intersection of calculus, statistics, algebra, and coding. Okay? So like that's the world that I live in right now. Okay, you do have to go to college for that. But electrical contracting and concrete work and flat work and steel and that sort of thing, you don't need to go to college. And you know what, Silas, like my point of view is I got 6 sons. I doubt all of them will go to college. In fact, if none of them go to college, I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to think that they're failures or anything like that. Because in Thomistic realism, the further removed we are from real things and the more abstract things become, that's a big problem. We experience reality by our five senses. And, like, so if you're just moving numbers around on a spreadsheet, which is like, that's a lot of my career is moving numbers around on a spreadsheet. It's very abstract, very theory, very, whatever, versus like the guy who can come and fix your clogged toilet. That guy has real value and that will never go away. And AI cannot replace it. And there's instant gratification in that sort of thing too, So I loved working with 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds in the trades business, and I particularly loved it when they took pride in their work. And it's hard to find those people. I generally tried to hire Catholics, generally tried to hire out of my parish or a well-known parish in the area. Sometimes with good success, mixed success with that. Sometimes the guys wouldn't work out. Sometimes they would. I think it's how you were raised. It's unique to the individual, but it's also like the burden of leadership and training and mentorship as well.
I'm curious with the pride in the work side of things. How did you approach it if somebody didn't necessarily have pride in their work? Was there particular ways that you would approach it and talk to them? And if it didn't work out, I'm curious if you did hire from the parish, how did you end the relationship in a way that still maintains it sort of like from a Christian perspective, even though the business relationship was severed?
Yeah, that's a good question, because here I am, like I kind of straddle in between, I'm 40 years old. And so if I'm hiring a 20-year-old, I'm friends with the dad at the parish, right? So 'cause he's 50. And so all my 50-year-old dad friends, are like, okay, Mike, I'm going to give you my son and hopefully he's good. Sometimes the dad dynamic is really interesting. Sometimes the dads would be like, hey, just so you know, like Johnny is a little bit cocky, a little bit arrogant, and I hope you can deal with that. Sorry. Other times, it's like my kid never does anything wrong, and you already know how that's going to turn out.
Yeah.
And so being friends with the family always made the dynamic interesting, because here when you have let's say Johnny, and that's not a real name, but who's not taking pride in his work, it's like, hey man, look, I know you. I know you know better. I know how you were raised. I know your family and your values. And by the way, the whole purpose of this is that we believe that the home is a sacred space. It's where families are raised. It's where children are raised. We believe that the home should be beautiful, that children should be surrounded by beautiful things, that when we enter into someone's place, we are on their turf and we need to leave it better than when we found it. And so instilling that as part of our culture, I've said it 1,000 times. I've said it in every recruiting video, every marketing video. I've said it on TV in my local market. This is what we stand for. This is what we believe. Your home is sacred. Your family deserves to be sort of enveloped in beauty and functionality. That's why we exist. That was our mantra when I was in charge, and I think it still continues. And so that's an easy conversation to have with guys, when because most people accept that point of view when you lay it out to them, and they
Hmm.
think, and then they realize I was being thoughtless, I was being selfish, I was being most of the time dirty. So clean up, sweep the
Hmm.
place at the end of the day. So
Yeah, it's very fascinating how the transcendentals, like when you bring up something that is true, it's like unless the person is extremely narcissistic or really really just blind, they usually like get the point, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I obviously I messed up there, and it's nice that you can hold them to that, because I think that there's just not enough of this, one-on-one mentorship, especially with young people these days. It's like a lot of my peers are always looking for mentors. And I didn't start out looking for mentors. I look for mentors now often, but at the beginning, people just like would kind of like take me under their wing without me asking. And that was really instrumental to me learning a few things that helped me early on. And I think it's a becoming a lost art, this idea of mentorship. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I have tons of thoughts on that. Let me try to just restrict it to one comment. Maybe it's a passing comment. We used to, in Christian culture, have a rite of passage for men, wherein a young man would seek the acceptance of men at large. Okay, and that manifested itself in multiple ways. We would have maybe trade unions or whatever, but or guilds. But ultimately, a man like was not accepted into the community until other men accepted him, and therefore he would be incentivized to go out and seek a mentor and become a man. We now have like a mommy culture where moms are in charge of everything, and there's been at large an abdication of masculinity of men, and so we don't have that. We don't have that anymore, and so there's no firm transition into manhood for most young guys, and this is a big problem for them because they're seeking validation. I think it's wired into them. They're seeking the validation of other men. And this can lead them down a path of where they're seeking it from like, less than ideal guys or whatever, and leads them into making really poor decisions. But we don't have like that transformation, that we used to. And so I think it is really important to have a mentor. I do have a mentor. I still have a mentor. He lives in California. He's quite a bit older than I am. I speak to him regularly. I ask him his advice on things. Sometimes I don't take his advice, but nevertheless can't move forward without getting his point of view on things. And so it's been extremely helpful for me to have a mentor. And I think that young guys really do need that, particularly because we live in such a feminized culture where like all the school teachers are women. The boys are raised by their moms and by women at school. And I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. I think you need a man to raise a man, And so if that's not happening in our lives, oh, and by the way, let me just say one thing, Silas, too, because I don't want to like pick on the guys. We're working harder today than we ever have, more hours. Our dollar is going less, because of various things that are outside of our control. So the system is really designed against men as well. So we're on, we're generally speaking, we're like in the car for 2 hours a day for the commute. We're working in some drudgery. We come home completely exhausted. There's not a lot left to give to the family and that sort of thing. That's an unnatural environment. That's an unnatural way to live. But that is one of the ways in which sort of the system has removed the man from the picture.
Yeah, there's a couple comments I want to make, and then maybe connected it back to one thing. Is number one, I think that you mentioned it's a very feminized culture, and it's not to say that feminine culture is a bad thing. It's just that we need to have the position of the masculine part and the feminine part working in harmony. And it seems like it's become, like you're saying, more. Everything just has to be feminine. You cannot be, let's say, harsh or rigid with people and say like and hold them to a standard. It's all, hey, you great job, everything's fine, and there's no level of rising to the occasion. So that's one comment I want to make. And then tying this back, you mentioned now like men are worked really it's very hard work. Like we're not receiving kind of the outcomes. I think people tend to look back and say, oh, the past was better, right? For this, like there's this whole debate around home ownership right now, in the 50s being the time, and everything was fine. But I would say I think that's somewhat incorrect. That if you look even before that, people were working really, really terrible jobs, probably longer hours, in worse conditions in the factories in the first part of the Industrial Revolution. But it still seems that there was some level of this man-to-man mentorship, right? Even though they were working hard, they were teaching their sons to become men, and those sons ended up going on fighting in World War II and just becoming like a generation that did things. I don't know, maybe the boomers became selfish. I'm not sure if you want to position it that way, but I'm just curious, like how can we take back that role of the father, of the masculine side of things, despite the challenges, because it seems like they did it in the past.
I don't know that I can disagree with much of what you said. I think that one of the forces that we face and that we often don't put any thought into, and I would encourage guys who are listening to this to put some thought into this, especially guys who have sons, is it was extremely common that we would have family businesses, and it was extremely common, or a family trade, or a family line of business, or a family expertise. Families would be known as, oh, this family, they're the doctors, or they're the lawyers, or they're the blacksmiths, or they're the whatever. And so one of the occasions for mentorship was the passing down of the knowledge, the skills acquired by the father to the sons. And
Mm.
so, but we don't have that in our culture, not because we don't want it, well, maybe because we don't want it, but we also just don't even think to do it that way anymore. We are atomized now in our sort of post Reformation, post John Locke society, where we really do believe incorrectly that the basic building block of society is the individual. And so we sort of ask our young boys who they want to be when they grow up, and they sever their ties to the family and they chase their own dreams. I think the best way to build family wealth and family continuity and to inherit a true identity is for the family to build its own business or system of businesses or way of doing things, that young men could, if and we could go back to this pretty easily, inherit their trade and their identity and like their sense of purpose from their fathers, not from their professors or not from society at large. And so, like, the idea that every person when he turns 18 should go figure out a life for himself, that's a revolutionary idea. And a counter-revolutionary idea would be to go back to a world in which fathers and sons worked side by side. To your point, Silas. And I think the Industrial Revolution began that transformation away from sort of dynastic thinking, but we need to be reconnected to the notion, and this is just like a fundamental thing. Tucker Carlson's good on this. Other commentators are good on this. The fundamental thing here is that the basic building block of society is not the individual. It's as per the Enlightenment philosophy that I reject, classical liberalism that I reject. The fundamental building block of a society is a family. And to whatever extent a business unit or a society or a structure, social structure, or a parish or whatever, to whatever extent they encourage the success of a family and the stability of a family, that's a good thing. To the extent that they discourage those things, we should oppose that. We should oppose that. Like, case in point, in today's news, like happening right now, live as we're talking about this 50-year mortgage. 50-year mortgage is not going to help a family. It creates forever debt. You never own it's gonna inflate the price of houses. It's gonna make property ownership more unattainable for the young people. It's one of the worst economic ideas that Trump's ever come up with, and that's not a short list of competition. So I think we really have to go back to thinking in terms of what does the family do. Now you may say, Silas, like, and you may object, and I'd love to hear it if you do, but that, well, aren't you restricting the freedom or the autonomy of the young man by saying that, okay, if dad's a CPA, then the son's going to be a CPA, and you'll have Monner, and Monner LLP or whatever, CPAs. I would just counter that by saying that actually, like, there's a lot of, going back to one of your first questions, there's a lot of peace in realizing that freedom is not the ability to choose whatever I want to do, but freedom is the ability to choose the good. And if my father has chosen a good path for me in my life, then freedom, my definition of freedom, is to accept that and choose the good that he's laid out for me. Because my father wills the good for my life,
Yeah, so there's a couple things. I generally agree with you. I find it challenging sometimes personally, and I can share a couple of pieces there. But I do generally agree, because there's this idea that we've talked a lot about with Catholic founders, is that if we think about the circumstances of the life we were born into, we didn't choose that, right? God chose that we were conceived at the exact moment we're conceived at. He gave us that soul, right? And that means history, like when in history we were born, to whom we were born, in what geography. All of these things are not in our control. They are not random. God chose this very specifically for us, right? So I've struggled with this a lot, because it's like, hey, what are the unique callings that we have because of what God put us into? And for me personally, like I kind of rejected it at some point. I was like, I don't want to take over my dad's business. I don't want to be involved with that. When I was young, I did. And then I kind of rejected it. And then I'm getting to a point now where I'm actually like, you know what? Even though I have some challenges in that relationship, I actually do want to be able to carry on that legacy of building cabinets, like building like well-crafted things, right? And that's my plan someday, is to take that over. And it's very fascinating that if we can accept this as not a restriction, like you're saying, but as a sort of like, hey, God gave you this special mission that's only for you because of your circumstances, it actually is way cooler, you know?
It is way cooler, and you get to work with your dad. And working with your dad is like the fact that that's been taken away from us makes dad a stranger. It makes him this guy who disappears all day, comes back and is grumpy, and we don't know anything about him. Versus working side by side with him, watching him struggle and overcome obstacles and think critically and take care of customers if you're in a customer business or work out problems. That creates a dynamic to where we understand our parents and we respect them in a way that honors the fourth commandment, not in an abstract way, but like in a concrete way. So I'm a big fan of family businesses. I'm very lucky. A lot of my students, they come to Benedictine with the intention of going back home and working in their family business. And I've got guys and girls that are doing that. And that's some of the most gratifying work that I do is preparing those young people to go back to their homes and re-enter their family businesses that maybe
Mhm.
they've worked for in the summer or interned at or
Yeah.
or whatever, and take it to the next level. So I do a lot of advising, academic advising, and just entrepreneurial advising. That is the most gratifying situation I'm in. I get to do it like every week. I'm in a new situation like that, so I love that.
That's cool. At this point, you've heard me mention our mission many times. We're building an army of Catholic entrepreneurs who are committed to reinserting God into the culture. Well, if this mission resonates with you, we want you to be part of the Catholic Founders Guild. You can think of this as kind of an association of Catholic business owners who share the same mission and who take this idea of bringing back God into the culture actually very seriously. We're currently around 50 members and growing quickly. And when you become a member, you can find other Catholics to do business with, to buy services from, to invest in and alongside. All this is possible with our member directory. And on top of that, we do have 2 to 3 calls each month with the community. One to discuss a particular topic, like stewardship or competition, some of the recent conversations we've had on that. One to learn from an expert and ask them questions, like our recent one on the tax changes, or our next one coming up with Alan Twomey, who is talking to us about how to grow our sales and our business, but in a virtuous way. And the other is more open-ended community hangout call. These will happen every single month. There's also no specific time commitment asked of you when you join the Catholic Founders Guild. If you want to be heavily involved, you're welcome to. If you just want to be a member of the Guild but don't really have time to attend the calls, all we ask is that you stay committed to the mission of building for God and be open to meeting other members of the Guild when they reach out. To join, the first step is to upgrade to a paid membership on our Substack. Think of it like Patreon if you're not familiar. Just go to catholicfounders.com/subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, so literally anybody can afford it. Oh, and I forgot to mention, many of the members have ended up actually finding customers within the community within just a few months of joining. So what I'm saying is you're likely going to get your $100 back, even if not directly through sales, at least in value and advice from the Guild. We will see you on the inside. And one last comment I wanted to make on this kind of general topic before we move on to some other ones is that, we talked about the Industrial Revolution. I think, again, my guess is that the part of the reason why some of this destruction started to happen is that when the Industrial Revolution came around, there was to a large extent, people were just viewed as effectively commodities, right? The working conditions were not ideal, and any man who loved his sons or his family in general would be like, I do not want this for you. So they would encourage them to go in a different path, right? This idea of continuity began to break down because I think we'll talk about it in a little bit. Families used to just have like you said, this family business. They had a trade. They were something that they could pass down, and this is how the knowledge good. There was no necessarily need for college because you just learned it from your family. But once you left your small business and you started just being a factory worker of some sort, and you realized how terrible the conditions were, you were like, I do not want this for my kids. Something else, please. And this is where it begins to break down. And then we kind of fast forward 80 years, a couple generations, and you see the things falling apart. So the comment I would make here is that for any business owners right now listening, make sure that you are making an environment where your employees can actually thrive and their human dignity is respected, so that they don't have these desires to disconnect from their children or to want something different. They should want the same thing, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I observed when I was in mergers and acquisitions was one of the really more prominent roles that you would play in the M&A space is selling entrepreneurial businesses. And I spent years working with founders who had, or even like second and third generation owners who had either founded or inherited the family business, taken it to an enormously successful level, and then had a dearth of willing successors. And so you have all of these businesses that are, let's say, in the revenue range of like call it 10 to 500 million dollar range, that are doing really well. They're very stable. Their customers love them. Some of them are very boring businesses, and the founder or the owner does not have a son or a daughter who wants the business. The sons and daughters, the successors, they don't want the business, they want the cash. And what are they going to do with the cash? I have no idea. Some of them wanted to go start wineries and, in California or whatever. And so there's this divergence from the stability. The 100-year family business now needs to be sold to private equity or to some other vulture out in our financial system in order to create the liquidity so that dad can give his inheritance to his sons while he's still alive, rather than in the form of the business, in the form of liquidation. And like I was part of that system, and I witnessed it so many times, and I helped craft many of these deals that I kind of have spent 10 years thinking about, like, why did I do that? Like what was actually happening? And that's a sad thing. I mean, I don't know if you've ever like have gone to an estate sale before, and like, here's this estate sale where the patrimony of the family is being sold off to strangers. And like, sometimes even the children are there and they're like, watching the 100-year-old furniture being sold or paintings or whatever because they want the cash. I think that the church bell should ring in that scenario, like with sadness. I think we should mark the death of a family when that happens. And I think we should mark the death of a family when the entrepreneurial venture that was family owned for 100 years now gets sold to some private equity vulture merely to placate the liquidity desire for the children.
Mm-hmm.
One
Yeah.
one of the things too, man, that I have to say is like, it is French Revolutionary principle that the idea that your estate is equally divided amongst all your heirs. One of the things that held Christendom together was contrary idea to that, called primogeniture, in which the firstborn son was sort of dubbed as the heir to the empire and the family assets, and he was raised in a way in which he had particular duties and responsibilities, and he would look after his siblings if the father were to meet his demise. And he was trained, to be the leader of the family someday, presumptively. And he would be disinherited if he did something completely dishonorable and all of those things. So as you're not like locked into this system. But it was the French Revolution that proposed that actually we have to break up all of these family-owned assets and equally divide them amongst the heirs. Well, how do you equally divide an estate or a business amongst 8 children? I've got 8 children. How do I do that? The only way to do it is to sell it. And who do you sell it to? You sell it to the financial powers. And so I think it's devastating that so many entrepreneurial businesses, as well as like land holdings, real estate holdings, and all of that, gets sold in order to meet this French Revolutionary principle of equal division amongst all the heirs. I think it's
Yeah.
a big mistake.
And it doesn't make sense too if you look at nature, because nature itself has variety, and it's obvious that, not every animal in the kingdom is equally powerful. If this idea of equality existed, the world would be completely smooth. There'd be zero like landscape, nothing would be interesting. But we can see in nature this kind of differentiation. And that's the same thing with humans, right? We all have a role to play individually, but also like within the society, within the marriage. All these things are there is no like pure equality, right? Equal in terms of dignity, but also we know that whoever does great things in this life will be rewarded to that extent in heaven, right? So I think this is I've never heard anybody connect those two things together, but that's really fascinating. I appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, so let's move into this a little bit. I want to get your thoughts. When we first talked, you had some thoughts about Saint Joseph and his entrepreneurial career, and I think we've been really in this thread of family businesses and just like that kind of fulfillment you have from being a business owner. Can you tell me some of your thoughts about Saint Joseph and his entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah. So one of the things that we don't think about often with Saint Joseph, but I open up every semester we're in entrepreneurship. I open up with this story about Saint Joseph and this like kind of meditative analysis where we look at like the life of Saint Joseph. Saint Joseph worked with his hands. He was a carpenter. That's the extent of that most people think through his actual business career. His business career was quite varied and faced a lot of obstacles. Saint Joseph had tools, therefore he had like capital expenditures. He had customers, therefore he had like marketing. Maybe most of his marketing was word of mouth. Maybe engaged in other marketing activities as well. Maybe he had like ran specials and seasonal specials. Maybe there was seasonality to his business. It's likely that that he kept track of his margins. You know, what are my costs on this job versus my materials, my labor, and what's my gross profit? It's very likely that he kept like financial records of his business activities. And then furthermore, when you trace the life of the Holy Family, where, you know, one day you're running your family business in the town that you grew up in, where everybody knew you and you inherited your father's trade and you're the successor of your father's trade, to now you must, according to the angel, go to Egypt. It's unlikely that he was able to bring all of his heavy tools with him, because they had to pack the essentials for the family, including Our Lady, and like put her on a mule probably, and you know, get into a new land where you don't know anybody, you don't speak the language, different culture. St. Joseph the Entrepreneur rebuilt. He reestablished a new business in a new location. It's almost like a new franchise location, where he began working in the same way that he was, the same processes, techniques, tools, procedures. He still had margins. He probably had to acquire equipment, make capital expenditures. There might have been debt associated with it, so there might have been a capital structure associated with his business. And then he did this again when they came back home, and he picked up where he left off. And who knows if his stuff was still there when he was waiting for him, or if he had to rebuild a third time. You know, so I look at Saint Joseph as an interesting case study in serial entrepreneurship. And I'm working on a paper on this that I don't know if anyone will ever publish, but I think it's a really interesting idea that if we assume like certain things about the Holy Family we need to know, because the Holy Family is in many ways the ideal. It represents like the ideal for family life. Okay. So, and one of those things is that like they homeschooled. Okay. So I'm a big homeschooler. I'm a big proponent of homeschooling. There was a school option, but they didn't use the school. The Holy Family like chose to homeschool. There are many other things that other more learned theologians and the like have drawn out of the life of the Holy Family, and lessons for how, you know, men and women should be and how you should raise your children, that sort of thing. But what I want to draw out of this is that the ideal economic unit is the family, and that the ideal way for the father to earn a living wage for his family was through self-employment, not through some mega corporation, not through some W-2 job, not through making yourself marketable to, you know, some private equity owned enterprise that is going to squeeze you dry, through self-employment. And you may even take it a step further, Silas, and note that actually he was working with his hands, doing something tangible. And I would agree with that as well. I think that's an important aspect of understanding what true masculinity is and what family-based economics could look like.
Are you a Catholic business owner trying to get more leads? Launching a podcast might be the best move that you haven't made yet. St. Colby Studios helps Catholic entrepreneurs launch professional, mission-aligned podcasts that build trust and increase leads. Their team walks with you every step of the way, from strategy and recording to branding and editing, so you can launch your podcast in under 90 days. And because you're a Catholic Founder listener, you'll get 20% off all services for the rest of the year of 2025. Just mention the show when you reach out. 158 million people listen to podcasts every month, and that's just in the U.S. Your ideal customer may already be listening to a competitor's podcast. Visit stcolbystudios.com to schedule your free consult today. That's spelled out, Saint, S-A-I-N-T, colbystudios.com to schedule your free consult today. Thank you, St. Colby Studios, for sponsoring this episode of Catholic Founders. All right, back to the show. I think there's a couple things that are worth, just stick out to me when you talk about this. It makes me realize that it kind of changes the things that you think about when you hear the parable of the stewards, for example, where it's like, if you are completely disconnected from the outcome of the business, like if you're just a line worker at a cheese factory or something, there's a lot of those people in Wisconsin, being the cheese state, but you don't necessarily have the same, like it's very, very disconnected from the outcome, right? So as a result, there is this kind of misunderstanding of what it means to be a steward in the first place. And if you start to reduce that in your employment, which you spend, 8-10 hours a day doing, a lot of your life, I would venture to say that it's very easy for that to just start to decay in every other area too.
Mm-hmm.
Your stewardship of your family, your stewardship of your home. Like you look around and it's just a shame to me that even in, I guess some good neighborhoods are not like this, but there's just a decay of people don't take care of their lawn, they don't take care of their house. It's just absolutely in disrepair. And it just nobody cares, right? We rent and I still take care. Like I repainted the deck, even though I couldn't get the landlord to pay for the paint. I was like, I'm just gonna repaint. I can't stand it, right? It's these ideas that it just disconnects. That's one thing that stands out to me, and just this other idea of it being a way for us to lean into the image and likeness of God, right? God is a creator. We are co-creators with God in the family, but also through entrepreneurship. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you that you tend to take care of your things more so than you would take care of other people's things. That's an unfortunate reality. I learned the opposite lesson. It was drilled into me in the Marine Corps that like the Marine Corps stuff, I better take perfect care of it or they're just going to make me pay for it. And sometimes, I have been often been disappointed where, when employees or subcontractors don't take care of my tools or my trucks or my things, whatever, in the same way that they would take care of their own things. But that's just a natural part of human nature. And this is why I think personal ownership of assets is really important. They don't want us to own assets. I mean, like, who's the they? Like the Bolshevik, sort of faction of the world, or neo Bolshevik revolution that's happening in America with Mondani and whatever in New York City. But they don't want you to own anything. And what happens when you don't own things is that you don't take care of anything. Um, and to your point, Silas, like when you start, you can tell a lot about a person's like family life by like what their car looks like inside, you know. And I hate to be like, I don't want to sound judgmental or anything like that, but people who take pride in the little things, people who make their bed in the morning, people who like, take care of their own stuff also tend to take care of their children and their wife and all the other stuff. So I think slovenly people or just being a slob in general is contagious, and it probably does transcend all aspects of your life once it seeps
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is again part of the idea of as why I think it's so important to either build some sort of mechanism for your business of ownership for the employees, or at least some sort of profit sharing in the business to an extent, because then there is less likelihood that they're going to view the assets of the business as disconnected from themselves, right? And I think this again, we need to just have this integrated life where we have that sort of ownership. And I just think for business owners, part of the whole reason we do this podcast is I'm trying to explore these ideas of how, especially nowadays, not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur because there are so many opportunities for employment. But for those of us who are entrepreneurs, the people we employ, we should try to help them grow in virtue through how we employ them and through the policies that we enact in our companies, right? So, you mentioned a little bit earlier this idea of franchises. You also have some thoughts on franchises, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is something that I've been working on for maybe the last year or something, and I think we're going to be able to present it at the Catholic Social Sciences conference next year. Working with a couple colleagues, one from Cambridge University and then another one down in Texas, and we're putting together like this. We've been working on this idea that says that, let me back up, that the traditional view, when you look at like Catholic social teaching and you read Rerum Novarum and Quadragesimo Anno from Leo the 13th and Pius the 11th respectively, a very logical conclusion is that the successors to the medieval guild system in today's context are the trade unions. And on the surface level, that seems to be true. So trade unions allow like for collective bargaining, and they allow for a collective association, which kind of looks like solidarity, one of the principles of Catholic social teaching. And then most people would caveat that and say, well, we needed the trade unions during the Industrial Revolution and they served that purpose, but now they've outlived their useful life and stuff. So then you get like Democrats or Republicans or whatever sort of arguing about trade unions in general, but then everyone may agree that they are the most look-alike to the medieval guilds. Well, what was the medieval guild system? And this is something that Leo the 13th admired, Pius the 11th admired, and it seems like Leo the 14th maybe admires this as well, possibly why he took the name. It seems like the medieval guild system was a system in which there was control. There was like control about who would join the guild, like who would be a tradesperson, who would be licensed. There was standardization of product and service quality. There was standardization of pricing. There was purpose of the guild was not just solidarity, i.e., association with members of the party, let's say, or the group or the trade or the company or whatever. It was also customer focused insofar as like customer experience would be standardized. In other words, a similar craft or a similar piece of carpentry or similar whatever from one part of the empire to the other part of the empire would cost the same and would be delivered at the same quality. So, and there was a mechanism whereby you could either join the industry with permission. And so I sort of think that this isn't a perfect comparison, but franchising, we're witnessing the franchising of everything. We're living through it right now. Probably, if anyone has had work done on your houses, a franchise has delivered the service. Probably, if you've eaten at a restaurant, you've eaten at a franchise. I don't know if you can hear my kids making
I can.
noise in the background.
All right, we'll live
Probably
with it.
all my windows are open, so it just kind of is what it is. Probably if you have, like when you die, the funeral home is either a franchise or private equity owned or multi-location where they've perfected the business model or whatever. Franchising, I think in a more deep context fulfills and is the true successor of the medieval guild system insofar as number one, you have standard process by which the business is done. That's controlled by the franchise, which would have been controlled by the guild. You have a standard pricing and quality delivery to the customer, standard customer experience, which would have been controlled by the guild, now is controlled by the franchise. You have a very selective process whereby franchisees have to qualify for membership, right? There's a steep financial cost of purchasing a territory or joining a franchise or buying a franchise, and there's training that happens at the home office. Now, there's also even political power that franchises have that medieval guilds would have wielded. You've got like McDonald's, for example, wields a significant enough amount of political power to where the president of the United States wants to be associated with McDonald's. And by the way, let me just give you one stat that like maybe not as well known. You are 8 times more likely to get into Harvard undergraduate school than you are to be selected to open a Chick-fil-A restaurant. Okay, so franchising, especially at the elite levels, at the top brands, is the new Ivy League. And so it's hyper selective. It standardizes how businesses operate. It delivers the similar quality to customers, and there is solidarity in a way that we don't see with trade unions. Like in trade unions, there's an us versus them mentality, wherein it's always management versus workers, and it's an adversarial relationship where one is trying to extract something out of the other. Well, in franchising, the franchisees and the franchisors are both mutually peers in this relationship, and that's actual solidarity. Actual solidarity would be where the owners and the workers and everyone else are all mutual members of the organization, of the guild. It's not just that the owners are these disconnected distance workers and like the worker bees can associate, which is how it is in trade unions. I'm putting forth this argument. I don't know that anyone has ever put forth this argument. I'm unveiling it for the first time here with you. I've already submitted a paper for publication on it. I hope that it gets published because I think it would be a really interesting talking point for us to explore further just as a business community or whatever. It breaks down a little bit. It's not the perfect successor, but I think it's a better successor in people's
Than the
minds
unions.
than
Well, yeah, because it's this idea of incentive structures is something I've always been fascinated by. And if you think, depending on how you look at things, the unions, like you mentioned this, you basically create an adversary, and therefore there's always going to be this sort of tension. When in reality, and sometimes that tension, in the case of unions, ends up really affecting the customer negatively, and by increasing prices that pass through to them, or like delays because everybody's on strike, whatever. But if you have these things all in union, it goes with the principle of, or with the transcendental of unity, right? Where everything is unified. There's like a unified version of this is not, we can't separate these pieces of our life out, and we can't separate these pieces of the business out. They all work together to create better products to people want to work with us, etc. And what you're talking about, the franchise side, makes much more sense. The one question I'd have is, if, I mean, I would assume you probably agree on the one of the core differences in my mind would be the cost of capital to get in versus I'm assuming in the guilds it was a time commitment primarily that you had to come in and learn, and then through that you could establish your own location, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think in the guilds you would exchange your earning potential and your time for membership, whereas with franchising, you generally exchange dollars for membership. But I think you could argue there's still an exchange of value happening
Yeah,
in both cases. It's just
similar.
that the
Yeah,
measure of value is different. And for franchising too, most of the elite franchises they're not looking for necessarily, they're not looking for the territory fee. That's not the primary means by which they share in value creation with a franchisee. They're looking for people who will, over the long term, operate the locations in a profitable way. That creates the long term value for both parties. So I think it's often misunderstood that, like, for example, the buy-in to buy a Dunkin' Donuts is like $1 million. Okay, and that's a steep purchase price to buy $1 million coffee location, and that may or may not even include all the build out costs with building the location and stuff. I'm actually not sure, but I know it's right around $1 million to start a Dunkin'. Well, Dunkin' Donuts, the parent, Dunkin' Donuts, the franchisor, is not going to get rich off of, starting, let's say they have 300 locations or something. That's 300 million, I mean, which spread over the course of 50 years, it's really not that much. They're not relying on the territory fee as the primary value creator mechanism. What they're hoping is that you operate the Dunkin' Donuts for 30 years and you sell $2 million worth of coffee every year at your location and you send them 6% of that every year. That's when it really starts to add up for them and for the franchisee. And so, in many ways, what we see with the territory fee is that it's actually a proxy for, are you a good business person? Have you made good financial decisions? Are you high functioning? Do you have a good credit score? Like those types of things. Can you finance this thing? And so if you have the ability to bring the capital necessary to open a Dunkin' Donuts, which I do not, but if you do, then that is a sign of success in business and that you've put your time in and that you have already been, like, so to speak, part of the guild, just not directly but indirectly, and you possess the skill, the
yeah,
requisite skill to join the guild. One final point on that too, which I think most people don't know: franchisors, and this is well researched and in peer reviewed journals all over the world. Franchisors vastly prefer multi-territory owners. By that I mean, like, Dunkin' doesn't want to have a bunch of single owner operators that open one location and that's it. And Dunkin' actually prefers that you own 5 different locations because, number one, it's hard to find, if you're the guy who can open a Dunkin' and can finance $1 million and can operate the territory and do well, they want you to do that over and over and over again. And they vastly prefer that. One of the secrets of franchising that I think is not well understood is that it's unlikely that you would pay the territory fee again and again and again for your second, third, fourth, fifth territory. So it's really like a screening item for first time franchisees. But then afterwards, I believe quite often territories are awarded to top performing franchisees with zero fees. And I personally experienced that. I was the top performing painting franchise measured by startup metrics and other metrics, and I didn't necessarily have to come out of pocket for territory number 2, territory number 3. So I've lived it and I've read it in the literature, and I think it's a pretty widespread practice.
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think you touched on this briefly too, but I would just double down on this point of subsidiarity too, right? Which is another part of Catholic social teaching. And this is how Tom Monahan talks about how he was able to grow. I shouldn't say he talks about, but when people were talking to him about his life, he was able to grow all the Domino's franchises so well because it goes down to this local level of, like, somebody in the restaurant oftentimes would then end up starting their own, and they had an understanding of the culture, especially at the early days, and that allows you to do things locally. And for anybody who's not familiar, the idea of subsidiarity is taking care of things at the most local level. And there was a time during the growth of Domino's when he had stepped back and let somebody else come in who wanted to centralize everything. And during that period of central kind of planning and running, the business started to really tank. As soon as he switched that person out with another person who was much more interested in letting the store owners run, then things started to take off again. I think this is we're running out of time here. I do really want to get your take on one more thing if you have time to go over a little bit. Cool. So you've got 8 kids, you said, and you're definitely a builder of sorts. So I'm curious. We just had a discussion about this in the Catholic Founders Guild recently about legacy. What building towards a legacy of our own idea, and then how to pass it down. So I'm kind of curious what your take is on legacy for your own kids. What do you want to leave behind? What do you think are the principles to keep in mind to do it in a way that's still focused on doing God's will over our will?
Great question. You know, in Rerum Novarum, Leo says that the children are a continuation of the father's personality. And I think when we view our children in light of Leo the Great, in case you can't tell, I'm a big fan, I think that can ground our thinking. And so we start to imagine that, you know what, them continuing our work and our legacy is the greatest compliment to us personally, but also it's the greatest gift that we can give them. So it goes two ways. So I'm a big fan of family businesses, family trade, a family skill set, and I think raising them in a way to where, you know, they view themselves as a continuation of you know, the Parrott family. Like, it's absurd to me to imagine that there's this 18-year-old redheaded kid named O'Brien, for example, who, when he turns 18, needs to go float the Nile River to find out who he is. Like, that's just like, you know who you are. You should know exactly who you are. You're an O'Brien. You're probably Celtic blooded. You probably, you know, there's all this patrimony that you should have received, but you didn't. And that's why you feel like you have to run off and figure out who you are and what I would hope is that my children don't have to figure out who they are, what they stand for. What I would hope is that they inherit an identity from me. There's big, you know, there's a war on identity right now in our culture, and what even is a man? Like, what even is a person? Transhumanism is like the next thing. The principle of identity is under attack. The principle of identity is not under attack in my house. In my house, my people know exactly who they are because they know who I am, and they know who my ancestors are. And one thing I can recommend to people that they look into is this idea of a family book. And the family book has 3 main parts to it. It's the past, present, and future. And the first part, what you have in the past is a family tree, family heritage. This is who we are. This is where we came from. This is our journey. If it's in the United States, it's how we came to the United States, who came here and why. These are not difficult things to figure out. And likely most people have a living relative who kind of nerds out on this stuff and can download with you like who your family actually is. And ideally what we could obtain is, and what we would have had in Christendom, there are examples of these with 15 generations worth of data in it. What we could obtain are the like life lessons and exhortations to future generations from past generations. So like my grandfather would write a letter to future generations. These are the struggles I had. These are the lessons I learned. This is what makes me who I am. My father would write a letter. I will write a letter. My firstborn son will write a letter. It all goes into the family book. This is the past speaking. This is who we are. This is the struggles that we have had for 150 years or 200 years or 500 years. Or in some cases in Europe, there are examples of these family books in France or in other places for 1,000 years. And a lot of the exhortations are quite beautiful. I mean, I've read some of them and they say things like, you know, what we bequeath to you is 15 generations of faithful Catholics. What we bequeath to you is 15 generations of whatever family name that have lived on these lands and owned this home site and this estate. And woe to you if you are frivolous with these inheritances. You know, imagine that. That's a received identity. That's a patrimony. That's grounding. That's heavy burden. That's responsibility. You don't need to float the Nile to figure out who you are. And so that's the first chapter of the book. The second chapter of the book is like sort of a current listing of assets, like almost like a balance sheet. Like, hey, this is what we've got. This is a listing of our stuff. I got these trucks. I got these businesses. I've got, you know, these real estate assets, these whatever, like whatever you have. And it could start small. It could start from almost nothing or whatever, you know, hey, I've got these gold coins or I've got this wedding ring or whatever it is, you know, but it's a listing of things that, hey, son, these are yours. These are going to be yours. These are what I inherited. These are what I'm giving to you. And then finally, you know, there's the future, which is your exhortation, your summary of your life to your sons and daughters. I'm not quite ready to write mine yet. I haven't had all the hardships that our Lord's going to send my way. I've had some, I've had many, but I think it takes until probably your 50th or 60th or 70th year to really process all of it and synthesize it and understand it and be able to communicate it. I think to your question, if people want to pass on their legacy, it starts now and it's a continual process, and it's an always everyday conversation in our family. But there's a written way to do it as well that I think is beautiful and we can go back to.
No, that's amazing. I think that's I really appreciate that. I've heard a lot about this topic, but I have not heard that specific mechanism, and I like that a lot. I've gotten into this a little bit more recently with my own family, trying to understand like the history of our family. And there was, my great grandpa Leo actually is the one who like built up a lot of things, and then my grandpa kind of things deteriorate a little bit, but it's helps to understand the history and, like you said, that sense of purpose. And you also think about the idea of compounding. If you want to achieve something great, talk about not having to go do this whole like discovery thing, right? This whole, I'm 15 years old, I'm trying to figure who I want to be. It takes me till 30, and then by that time I just start really gaining traction in my direction, and my compounding is just beginning. There is no compounding up to that point. But if you already have that and you accept it and you say no to the other things, just like any good business person knows, you have to say no to good decisions in order to have good opportunities, in order to say yes to the great opportunities. It's the same thing. Like, you can compound your life. You can achieve more, not for yourself only, but for what God wants you to do with the church, with your communities, etc. So I think this is really amazing. I really appreciate your topics. I'm glad I asked you that, and we went on to that. So let's just wrap up here with a couple rapid fire items. What is your favorite scripture specifically related to business ownership or entrepreneurship?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I guess I don't have one. Generally, when people ask me my favorite scripture, it's John 6, because like that's what caused me to convert when I realized that our Lord like was literally saying, "You will chew my flesh." So I read that at Texas A&M in college, 20 plus years ago, and was like, okay, I got to do this. But I've never thought about business scripture before. Thanks for putting
That's
me on
okay.
the
I
spot.
think I think I think that is a good one though. John 6. The Eucharist is obviously the core. I always argue with my Protestant friends about it really comes down to like the red pill is effectively Eucharist, right? So that's a good one. Who's your? I mean, I can probably guess, but who's your favorite saint?
My favorite saint, Saint Nicholas.
Oh, okay, tell me more.
Yeah. Well, I love Saint Nicholas. First of all, he was a man's man. He stood up for the truth. He was faithful, a faithful bishop, even when most of the bishops were unfaithful. That's not a new phenomenon in church history, but also he had a devotion to children, and the Feast of Saint Nicholas is a huge feast day in my house. There's a lot of interaction with Saint Nicholas and the children. They get a letter from him, telling them what they need to work on and all during Advent and that sort of thing. And they write him letters. And so there's a lot of correspondence with St. Nicholas in my house. So I credit St. Nicholas with being able to provide for them. I asked St. Nicholas for the ability to do that, especially around the holidays, but year round as well. So I think, yeah, he's big time in
It's
my
beautiful.
world.
I like that. Thanks for that. And who is your favorite entrepreneur, living or deceased?
I don't know that I have a favorite entrepreneur because they're all such eccentric people, you know? Like like I could come on here and list some of the famous tech bros, right? That maybe some of your other guests have listed. And yeah, and they've changed the world and they've done amazing things, but they're also completely flawed and very interesting and eclectic people. I think probably I have to say that my favorite entrepreneur is St. Joseph,
Yeah,
because
awesome.
he didn't sacrifice for extreme wealth. He didn't sacrifice his soul.
Yeah, amazing. And what is your favorite devotion?
My favorite devotion is the Holy Face. It's a Carmelite devotion. It came to us in the 1800s. It was given to this nun, Saint Saint Peter, by our Lord directly. She was given this devotion to the Holy Face, which actually started with Saint Veronica. It's one of the Stations of the Cross. But the devotion to the Holy Face is a love for the disfigured, beaten, brutalized face of our Lord. And in the particular chaplet of the Holy Face was given to us, and the Golden Arrow prayer, it was given to us as from our Lord's mouth. He used the word communism to fight communism, which is the great evil of our day, even still, like America's
Hmm.
communist. And I love it because it's masculine. It's very what is the word? It's like a martial devotion. It's like I'm taking the fight to the enemy.
Hmm.
Sister Mary of Saint Pierre like not have heard of the word Marxism before, or
Mm,
communism or Bolshevism. She would not have heard those words because she was in a convent, and like Karl Marx was barely getting around to doing what he was doing. And so like the fact that our Lord used that word with her, that tells us something very important, I think. And it's probably, in my view, the most important devotion. Like it will be the singular devotion needed to for this period of time in history.
yeah. It's been a very long time since I've prayed that prayer. I am familiar with it from the Pieta book, but that's good. I appreciate that. Well, Mike, this has been an amazing episode. I really appreciate your insights. I think you got a lot of wisdom. I can see why you're a teacher, and I know some of your students, and they really enjoy learning from you. I can say that much. So you've got some good reviews on that front. But I appreciate you coming on. We're gonna have to do this again, and hopefully we'll hang out in Kansas City sometime.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Take care, man. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode with Mike. I would encourage each of you to consider for a moment your legacy. What legacy do you want to leave to your kids? And then for you, what legacy have you stepped into from your own family? Depending on where you are in your career, you probably focus on one of these. If you're very early, you'll be asking yourself, what kind of legacy does my family have that I was born into? Is there some way I can continue this? Am I called to continue this? Am I called to, maybe in some cases you want to break away from that legacy, from that kind of history, the family history, and that's okay. That's Some of us have that. But if you're towards the end of your career, you might be thinking, what kind of legacy am I going to leave? And based on the topics that we discussed today, I think we all have a lot of things to think about when it comes to this legacy, to family continuity, to passing down something that is like a trade, a family business. Just a lot of really interesting things that we can think about here. And spend some time thinking about this and kind of chewing on it in the coming weeks. I would encourage everybody to really pray about it, because this is, I think, a very important thing for each of us individually to try to understand. And it's probably something that we're going to wrestle with. We're never going to have pure yes or no answers, or clear answers as to what it is, but there's something unique that God's calling us to, given the circumstances of our lives. So I encourage you to pray and think about that. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to another amazing episode of Catholic Founders. Happy building, and we will see you next time.